Happy New Year, everybody, and Tony here with my tribute to Will Smith's Red Table Talk Takeover from Red Table Talk, which aired on Facebook Watch on November 20, 2020. This was also the episode that saw Will Smith and Janet Hubert finally reconciling after their 27-year-old feud against each other. This was hosted by Will Smith, and the guests were Janet Hubert and Dr. Ramani Durvasula. Now, I'm sure that those of you who are major fans of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, as well as those who have been loving this show ever since they were young, are also aware of the contentious conflict that occurred behind the scenes between Will Smith and Janet Hubert. Even before this conflict, Will Smith also had a budding music career as a rapper alongside DJ Jazzy Jeff. Although they've managed to make a lot of profits from their records, their latest one flopped, and the IRS were in hot pursuit on Will Smith, who ended up owing the IRS over $2.8 million because he lived over his means despite constantly releasing new albums. In order to no longer be in trouble with the IRS, Will Smith found himself on the Arsenio Hall show in the hopes of further jettisoning his career until one fateful moment where Benny Medina hired him to star in a new sitcom that he has conceptualized. Therefore, Will Smith, aka the Fresh Prince, became the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, thus starring in this 90s sitcom as its main protagonist. Joining the cast as his stage aunt / stage surrogate mother, Vivian Aunt Viv Banks, was Janet Hubert, an accomplished actress, singer, and dancer, especially on Broadway, given her stint as one of the characters on Cats. While the familial relationship went well on and off screen, especially between Will Smith and Janet Hubert, their relationship unfortunately grew sour in the later seasons. This was also more difficult on Janet Hubert as she was additionally pregnant with her new child. During a radio talk show in Atlanta, the young Will Smith claimed that Janet Hubert wanted the show to be the Aunt Viv of Bel-Air show, and also claimed that she was very difficult to work with, while Janet Hubert contended that she only wanted professionalism on set. This clash resulted in a long feud going on between Will Smith and Janet Hubert, which lasted for nearly 30 years, even to the point that in various reunions, the only actors to have ever had reunions with Will Smith were Tatiana Ali, Alfonso Ribeiro, Karen Parsons, Daphne Maxwell Reid, the second Aunt Viv, Joseph Marcel, and James Avery before his passing. Not present in any of those reunions was, of course, Janet Hubert. Just as we fans of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air thought that there was no end to the feud in sight, 2020 came along with a pleasant surprise. And when I mean pleasant surprise, I meant Will Smith and Janet Hubert finally reuniting after feuding for many years, and after so much animosity and bad blood occurring between them. Why do I bring this up again? Because this particular Red Table Talk also featured Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's reconciliation, something that needed to happen for many years, and something that we the fans have been anticipating as well. And I'm sure this was also something that both Janet Hubert and Will needed in their lives, not only as actors, but also as people who have been through so much pain and through so many personal issues, even to the point where keeping it bottled in was not going to help anything, and keeping this fuel burning was not going to help their situations too. So leave it up for Will Smith's Red Table Talk Takeover to hash out whatever ills were occurring between them. In terms of the Red Table Talk, I have not been the most loyal watcher of this particular Facebook Watch talk show. I just perceive it as empty noise at worst and a distraction at best, especially when I'm having a bit of a bad day or if I'm just looking for a slight amount of entertainment. However, this particular episode of the Red Table Talk struck me because, as I stated before, it was time for both Will Smith and Janet Hubert to finally bury the hatchet. After so many years of feuding, animosity, and so much hurt that was occurring between Smith and Hubert, it was time for the both of them to finally reunite and make the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's 30th anniversary reunion all the more fully realized, especially with the original Aunt Viv. There was a particular highlight that I'd like to emphasize before the Red Table Talk commenced. Will Smith rapping mic check before the talk started, which showed that Will Smith, even though he's a famous movie star, which he has been for many years, still has not lost his touch as a rapper who's got the bars and the rhythm to prove that he not only has it, but it's been with him ever since, and he has not left his musical talents. Yes, I'm sure you already know about the behind the scenes drama that occurred, not only in terms of Will Smith's financial problems, but also what happened behind the scenes of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, first starting off rather well as a family, especially where Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's bond, playing surrogate son and surrogate mother, was concerned. But of course, the feud between Will Smith and Janet Hubert, which has been ingrained in many television history books. And lest we forget about the feud resulting in Janet Hubert leaving NBC only to be replaced by Daphne Maxwell Reid as the new Aunt Viv. Ever since then, Hubert's and Smith's feud continued to have fuel to the fire. With the feud between Smith and Hubert continuing, Janet Hubert had this to say in a Facebook video back in 2018. And I, for one, also watched that video in full, and I thoroughly empathized with Mrs. Hubert. What I've seen in that video proper was that she was someone who endured so much pain, so much anguish, and so much sadness and tribulations in her life that I felt not only sorry for her, but wished this did not happen to her in the slightest. And I would never want to wish what happened to Janet Hubert to even happen to my worst of enemies. So hearing Janet Hubert's voice, especially when she addresses Will, all soaked in sadness, all soaked in loss, and in so much pain, especially when she was trying to get her message across to Will that she was not fired by NBC, but it was Will who permeated that message. She was only given a bad deal, and she was only given very little work, and her salary was reduced, not to mention the fact that she was pregnant, thus making her position all the more contentious. Nobody understood her, not even her own on-screen surrogate son understood her, and the less said about Alfonso Ribeiro also being in cahoots with Will Smith during their young and volatile years, the better. Even Will Smith was very hesitant about watching that particular video, and it clearly made an effect on him, especially when Janet Hubert stated that she still reeked of that vomit that Will Smith spewed at her. Aside from those excerpts, it also made me realize that it was not only Janet Hubert's family crisis that she was trying to fight, but also the fact that she was dealing with the Black community who she initially thought were supportive of her turn against her, and many fans of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air thinking that she was not only difficult but also pernicious to the entire execution of what Fresh Prince of Bel-Air could have been and more. So even after the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air even ended, there was just so much unresolved trauma, unresolved conflicts, and unresolved pain that needed to be addressed. And what better way to address it than the main highlight of this particular Red Table Talk: Will Smith and Janet Hubert finally reconciling. It starts off with both of them asking how they are, and this has also given Will Smith the opportunity to finally listen and understand what Janet Hubert was going through. Sure, there might have been so much discourse by the tabloids, and especially started by Will Smith and Alfonso Ribeiro, stating that Janet Hubert was difficult to work with and that she was haughty, snooty, and too much of a snob on set. But all she ever wanted was professionalism. All she ever wanted was just to keep things straight and in order, and she just wanted to make sure that everything went well. At the same time, Janet Hubert was also dealing with not only personal problems, but also professional problems. Where the professional issues were concerned, NBC gave her, as she put it, a terrible deal in which they reduced her appearance and her workdays to only 10 weeks. Therefore, her salary was reduced and she could not work anywhere else aside from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. As if her situation was not already contentious, she was already pregnant starting in season 3, and her pregnancy was also written into the main story of that particular season until she gave birth to her first son in February 1993. While she was a new mother, she was also dealing with an abusive relationship with her ex-husband, and she also started a new business, had to deal with a mortgage, but it was almost too little too late, as she said that she lost everything: her reputation, her financial wealth, and everything that she was defined by, both as a performer and as a person. Furthermore, she was repudiated not only from the Black community, also her family. She even stated to Will that she wanted to clear her name before her father died, which was almost too little too late. And it was at that moment that as soon as Will was taking in everything that Janet exposited, he also broke down in tears. And it also made me realize that both Will and Janet had so much unresolved pain, trauma, and frustration they had to hash out. It does say something that Will was far from that impulsive 20-something that he was in the 90s. And now that he's a full-grown adult with a previous marriage, a marriage that I'm not even so sure is going to stay stable that much longer, and children, he now understood what it was like in Janet Hubert's position as an older woman in the cast. And this was also something that I have been cherishing in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's first 3 seasons before Janet Hubert was replaced by Daphne Maxwell Reid. Sure, Vernee Watson Johnson might have portrayed Will's biological mother, Viola, and their moments with each other are deep, meaningful, lovely, sweet, and fun. And while I do love the chemistry between Vernee Watson Johnson and Will Smith as mother and son, that's almost nothing compared to Aunt Viv's and Will's relationship, not only as auntie and nephew, but surrogate mother and surrogate son. It's even gotten to the point where there's a lot of discourse about this particular reunion, about a mother finally reuniting with her son, and her son finally understanding her and therefore acknowledging her not only as his mother, but also his fellow kin. And that's what I managed to attain from Will Smith and Janet Hubert finally reconciling. And during the interview that Will had with Dr. Romani, he even exposited that Will's childhood was not particularly rosy. Yes, Will even contended that Papa's Got a Brand New Bag almost had barely anything to do with his relationship with his real-life father, because although there was a lot of discourse about Will improvising that scene and basing it on his own relationship with his father, he contended that his own relationship with his father was not as torrid nor as broken as Will, the character's relationship with his biological father, Lou Smith, thus stating that the actor Will Smith had an all-right relationship with his father, although this Red Table Talk showed a different side to Will's relationship with his own father. His father might have served in the military, but he was also someone who was easily frustrated, angry, had a lot of bad moods, and almost threatened to hit Will's own mother. And there were times that Will as a child had to protect himself by using comedy, humor, entertainment, and making jokes, let alone cracking jokes, as a means to assuage himself from all the tumultuous times that he has felt with his family. It's also the classic case of art imitating life, because the character Will Smith might come off as humorous, charming, and absolutely hilarious in terms of the many jokes he cracks, whether it be at Uncle Phil's expense or even his whole family's expense, let alone his own expense. But deep down, he is still that lost little boy. And I'm sure that viewers who look beyond the swagger and the humor and the charisma could see somebody like Will, who was that lost little boy who still needed someone to approve of him, whether it be Uncle Phil or Aunt Viv, let alone his surrogate siblings slash cousins. He needed their approval. And this was also evident in the actor Will Smith's life, both as an actor and as a person. He always believed that that little boy in him could state that so long as he kept people laughing, as well as his father laughing, and everybody entertained, he'll make sure that he will continue to protect himself. And this need for approval was also evident in Will Smith's life as an actor, especially when it came to his bond with James Avery, as well as with Janet Hubert. So the whole discourse of Janet Hubert not laughing at his jokes and constantly having to stay at her room, especially by NBC, was not necessarily seen as Janet Hubert hating on Will, but she was also going through a lot of turmoil herself. And as Dr. Romney said, Will Smith has been taking in a lot of psychological punches from Janet Hubert and his childhood, thus implementing what he has dealt with in his childhood that ended up growing with him to his early adult years, especially with his stint as Will Smith on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, with Will Smith finally getting the message as to what sadness and loss Janet Hubert had to go through. It was also Will who admitted that he was somebody who was threatened not by Janet Hubert, but by the world. And the only way to fight this feeling of being threatened was through comedy, through jokes, through humor, and through being this charismatic joker that everybody could laugh at and can laugh with. But even that had not so great consequences on Janet Hubert herself. And yes, Janet Hubert also stated that yes, Will was live, but it did not excuse the fact that his words also had a very terrible effect on Janet Hubert of what she ended up going through in her life. And it was also great to see Will Smith finally owning up to his own mistakes. Did that excuse him from all the pain he inflicted on Janet Hubert during his run on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? No, but at least this was a step forward into Will finally acknowledging his mistakes and finally taking full responsibility of his role in Janet Hubert's own trials and learning from his experience as a father who has kids to raise, as well as a husband who has gone through a couple of marriages, one that didn't work out too well, and another that, while it did go quite well in the beginning, is not entirely so secure these days. And at least there was also something behind that whole joking nature, because he wanted to be this entertainer because he sought for Janet Hubert's approval. So with both Will Smith and Janet Hubert finally realizing who they truly are on the inside, and therefore understanding and listening to each other, thus validating each other as fellow people and hashing out whatever ills or pains or sorrows withheld them, they finally hug and make up. And this has been something I have been anticipating because it was high time for both Will Smith and Janet Hubert to reconcile, to make up, and to realize that life is just too short to let this grudge of a feud withhold anything that they have in their lives. And life is also way too short to let any ill encroach them as people, let alone be bitter and continuously full of grudges. With them finally accepting each other and burying the hatchet, it was definitely great seeing both Janet Hubert and Will Smith not only being reunited, playing surrogate mother and surrogate son, but also as fellow people who will be there for each other. And I also like that line that Will said that he doesn't want to be that type of person who hurts her. He wants to be the type of person who will protect her. And back to his talk with Dr. Romany, he even relates this experience to the women that he has been having in his life. Thus, going back to his tenure as a young man who believed that success in the form of earning money, having a career as an entertainer, and just acquiring all this wealth could make his family happy and make sure that his parents were no longer feeling contentious with each other, although Will Smith's parents separated back when he was 13 years old. So there was also that sense of loss that Will Smith had, that he didn't realize that Janet Hubert was going through. And with everything that he was able to learn from Janet Hubert now, there was also this acronym that Will Smith came up with that summed up the entire experience. Love, spelled L-U-V, is about listening, understanding, and validating somebody. There is no D in love, there is no debate in love, but there is listening to that person, understanding that person of what they are going through, and validating that person for who they are inside and out, thus showing acceptance, empathy, and most importantly, compassion. So the compassion that Will Smith and Janet Hubert had for each other was very necessary, because this also demonstrated that they were going through similar experiences. They just didn't realize it until they had that talk that they so wholly deserved. So yes, the takeaways from this Red Table Talk is that we as people do need to be protected, because protection, being safe, and being secure are very paramount to us, a lot more than food, clothing, shelter, air, and water. And we also cannot forget that we as human beings also have our own defense mechanisms to protect us. In Will Smith's, it was comedy and humor. Lest we forget about the most important values of listening to others, understanding each other, and validating each other for who they are, thus showing that these are the components of what love looks like and feels like. But it's also the age-old tale of both Will Smith and Janet Hubert dealing with so many trials and tribulations, both in their personal lives as well as their professional lives. They were taking a lot of things a lot more personally than they expected it to be, which also explained why there was so much contentiousness going on between Will Smith and Janet Hubert during the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's run, only for Janet Hubert to leave after season 3, thus being replaced by Daphne Maxwell-Reid. But this necessity to entertain and to be professional did see a clash, which ultimately broke Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's communication with each other until that very year of 2020, where they finally reunited after many years of feuding, animosity, and heartache. At the end of the day, if you overlook the power play that has been occurring throughout NBC during the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's run, you also realize that this was the tale of two very passionate actors who not only had a lot of talent, with one being a novice to acting and therefore finding his way into that industry, thus becoming a movie star after that, and the other one who had experience in Broadway, in stage and screen, who ended up dealing with a lot of power struggles by the network and felt untrusted, especially by her co-stars, only to find herself seeing a renaissance in her acting career. And here they are finally realizing that fighting against each other was extremely futile. And the fact that they managed to listen to each other and therefore learned compassion through each other definitely made this reunion between Will Smith and Janet Hubert all the more worthwhile. And I definitely salute them for not only dealing with this problem the best way they could in a mature and respectful manner, but also addressing it and not bottling it up any longer. To say that Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's reconciliation was anticipated is a mere understatement. Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's reconciliation was the tonic necessary to make the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's 30th anniversary reunion all the more fully realized. Sometimes I still cannot believe that this took over 27 years for both Will Smith and Janet Hubert to finally bury the hatchet. And while they could have easily solved this back then, this was not particularly easy, especially for both Will Smith and Janet Hubert. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of soul searching, it took a lot of understanding, and of course, it took a lot of compassion and courage for both Janet Hubert and Will Smith to finally see each other eye to eye again and acknowledge each other for who they are on the inside and on the outside, thus discarding any form of bad blood occurring between them and making that animosity dissipate, hopefully for good. I know I'm also going to sound rather repetitive, but I have been rooting for both Janet Hubert and Will Smith to finally reunite. And their reunion was not only touching, but it also made me feel a sense of compassion, understanding, and it also made me formulate my New Year's resolution, which is to learn to forgive people a lot more. I'm sure that it was also a difficult process for both Will Smith and Janet Hubert to go through, considering all the bile they spewed at each other and so many things that hurt each other that were out in the open, which initially started out as private, but ended up being part of public discourse. Nevertheless, it was phenomenal to see both Janet Hubert and Will Smith finally being reunited, and let us just thank the Lord that both Janet Hubert and Will Smith finally reconciled. And for those of you who tune into Will Smith's Red Table Talk Takeover, what'd you think of it? Were you really touched by Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's reconciliation, even to the point where you have been wanting this to happen? And was there a moment that made you realize that they had a lot more in common and this was what they were going through at the time? Was there a moment that made you feel particularly enlightened, whether it be the horrible deal that Janet Hubert had to face, as well as Will's initial unawareness of what she had to go through, thus linking it all with his childhood of wanting to be acknowledged and having his parents' approval? Or did you feel like this particular Red Table Talk was quite manipulative and it was too schmaltzy for your liking? Or is there something about Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's reconciliation that still left you skeptical? Comment below and let me know. Well, that's it for my tribute to Will Smith's Red Table Talk Takeover, especially where Will Smith's and Janet Hubert's reconciliation was concerned. Tune in much later for my tribute to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's 30th anniversary reunion, which is also my final Red Ribbon Reviewers contribution. So until then, Happy New Year, everybody!